Good evening, everybody. My name is Jen Budny, and I'm Executive Director of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada. I'm thrilled to see so many people who've joined us for tonight's event from all across the country. Clearly, there's a strong desire to learn more about herbalism and to make new connections between our bodies and nature, and to learn more about ancient ways of healing. Before we begin our lecture today, I would like to acknowledge the land on which the Ukrainian Museum of Canada is situated. Our museum is located on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, and Métis peoples. We recognize and respect their historical and ongoing connections to this land. As we gather virtually for today's lecture on traditional Ukrainian herbalism, we extend our respect to all Indigenous peoples from across Canada. Our presenter tonight, Dionne Jennings, joins us from Winnipeg, which is situated on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are grateful for the opportunity to share knowledge and traditions today, and we acknowledge the enduring presence and deep-rooted cultural heritage of Indigenous communities across these lands. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. We've got quite a number of people online tonight, and we may not be able to take questions, or we won't be able to take questions until the end of Dionne's presentation. To ask a question or to make a comment, please use the chat function, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. When Dionne is finished her talk this evening, I will select questions and comments from the chat to read out loud to her. I apologize in advance if I don't get to your question. Quite often we have so many questions we have to choose, but I do encourage you to post your questions at any time so you don't forget, and we will come to them at the end of the talk. Also, we are recording tonight's talk, and we will get it up on the museum's website and YouTube channel in the next week or so. So if you have friends or family who wanted to be here but couldn't make it, please let them know to check our website or our YouTube channel regularly. And at some point in the next 10 days or so, is my guess, they'll be able to view this presentation. We are so lucky to have Dionne Jennings presenting tonight. Dionne's mission as a community herbalist is to connect plants and people, a journey that has deep roots in her Ukrainian Canadian heritage. Growing up in the Ukrainian Canadian diaspora in Alberta, Dionne's heritage ignited her interest in Ukrainian and Slavic folk medicine. It also fostered a deep passion for community engagement through traditional folk arts such as embroidery, song, and beading. Dionne's lifelong affinity for working with plants and flowers led her to begin studying herbal medicine in the folk tradition 20 years ago on Vancouver Island. Her dedication to this field took her back to Alberta, where she completed a rigorous 3-year supervised clinical apprenticeship that ended in 2015. As a community herbalist, Dionne helps others reconnect with traditional plant knowledge and practices, whether they're living on acres of stewarded land or navigating the complexities of an urban environment. Her work is not only about botanical pursuits, but also deeply intertwined with cultural history, which is what we love. She's committed to fostering inclusive community connections and dismantling barriers to cultural engagement. Dionne is also a storyteller and communications professional, passionate about teaching, researching, and sharing cultural stories and experiences. She works to ensure that cultural practices are accessible and inclusive, helping to carry age-old traditions throughout communities nationwide. So we are very fortunate to have her with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Dionne Jennings to our virtual stage. Thank you, Dionne.
Hi, Jen. Thank you so much. Thanks for that lovely welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I'm beyond thrilled to be here in the space of the, from within the Ukrainian Canadian community to talk about two of my favorite things, plants and herbs, and Ukrainian Canadian culture. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We have a lot of stuff to get through tonight that I want to get through. Just as an aside, Lindsay, I can see anytime someone is entering the meeting, and I don't know if there's a way that I can not see that because I'm finding it really distracting on my just from my focus. Sorry, I was going to try and drop it in the chat before we started, but I wasn't able to sneak it in super subtly. But we'll move on. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Bear with me. This is always a little bit cumbersome. And here we are. We're going to talk about Ukrainian Canadian folk medicine and rituals. And we're going to go on a journey, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun. So first of all, about me, Jen did a very thorough introduction, which is awesome. I grew up in the Ukrainian Canadian community in Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton. I started studying herbalism 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, actually, probably now, as she mentioned. I've done a lot of teaching, instructing, worked in the communication space very extensively with regards to like herbal medicine. And so I really love teaching events, facilitating, creating juicy content, finding like entry points for people to connect with plants. But that being said, I'm also a Ukrainian nerd, and I'm an active volunteer at the Ukrainian Museum of Canada Manitoba branch, where I get to fondle the artifacts carefully on a regular basis. I'm obsessed with Ukrainian embroidery and beading, and obviously I have a passion for herbal medicine and Ukrainian folk medicine. So thank you. And thanks, Jen, for that land acknowledgement for where I'm coming from this evening. I appreciate that. Okay, so here's some of where it all began. This is a historic photo from early 1900s of on my mom's side, well, we'll get there. My Guido's family, 1901, 1903. This is the group of family of my great-great-grandfather and his brother, wives, kids, extended family coming here to Treaty 6 territory back in the day. So who am I? I want to orient myself, right? Like, who am I to talk about this cultural stuff? I'm not an expert, I'm not an academic, but I have been working in directly with plants and herbs for a long time. And, I grew up, like I said, in the diaspora from Edmonton. My family is from northeast of Edmonton. They came and settled in the county of, what is now the county of Two Hills. This is my family's church, Shepenitz. My family came from Bukovyna, from Luzhane, Mamyevsy and Shepinsi, which is now Chernivtsi Oblast. They came in the first and the second wave of immigration. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Oh, so I was very lucky to spend a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. And I was like, ooh, I want to like show some photos to sort of like orient, that I was a city kid, but we spent a lot of time on the family farm. Oh, I'm getting teary. I was like, oh, hi, Baba. But I was like, Baba's gonna come down and haunt me for showing some like old photos and like old buildings and like all this stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna put some good stuff here of Baba just to orient the fact that I'm talking on a screen, and I know you don't want to see the same slide for like 10 minutes. Okay, so yeah, like I said, my Baba's family came during the second wave of immigration in the early 20s. So even though I was a city kid, we did spend a lot of time like on a family farm. So, one of these last generation family farms where they raised beef, grain, my Baba raised chickens, she sold eggs, we brought them to the city, sold them to the city folks, farm cream, all this kind of stuff. She had extensive kitchen gardens. So we'll talk about kitchen gardens a little bit later. I'm not talking like, so here's her in front of this cute little garden. She's like in her late 80s. And this is like, this is like her very toned down version of like she would have had acres of kitchen gardens in her original home. And she was an amazing cook. She preserved everything. Here she is making her cellar holopsy on the top right-hand corner, which are like, the best. And here she is on the left, just whipping me up a little light lunch when I came to visit. This is not a dinner for like 12 people. This is for me visiting her at her little retirement home. She's making me, Bukovynian beets, and she's making me looks like nachinka and all this kind of stuff. I was so spoiled. So anyway, not to talk about me the whole time. I'm just trying to give you like some context for what we're talking about and where we're going. Okay, so further context. So I just want to just touch on the fact that some of the stuff that I'm sharing is going to be very familiar to some people in the community, and it might be brand new information to other people. And so I don't know where everyone is coming from tonight. Like, we're on the internet. I know there's people all across provinces, there's people from under the country. Like, I don't know what your context is for what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I want to go through some of this really quickly. Yeah, so I talk a lot about knowing your context, when it comes to culture and folk medicine, because there's lots of lenses through which we can see this. Like, when did your family come? Where did they come? What was their experience? There's so much to that. So I guess I want to just offer that up, that there is going to be different perspectives. Some of you may have different information, or you might have something that you want to contribute. This might jog some family memories for you, and I encourage you to share those for us tonight in the chat. You might be like, yeah, I know this, or you might be like, I know that better than you. And that's fine. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to make an educated guess and say that the folks that are here in the chat tonight, if there are some that are closer generationally to like the first and second wave of immigration, like in terms of like their family ties, they're going to know this better than people who are younger, or the folks of you that might be newcomers from Ukraine, or newcomers to Canada, or wherever it is that you're coming from. And so I just want to like offer that up so that we're starting with a base, right? Let's see. So I guess I just want to say that we can still pool our cultural memory like in a meaningful way, even though we come from different places, like whether it's literally geographically, figuratively, whatever, right? Yeah, okay, great, let's go. Okay, we're going to start with cultural and community hunger. Weird, right? It has nothing to do with plants, but it does. Okay, so we're going to start with a story, because I love to start with a story, and I love to learn through storytelling. And I did not put a bunch of slides of myself on here because I just want everyone to see how cute I am. I just also want me to stare at this slide for 10 minutes, and it is relevant to the context. So I grew up in Alberta. I spent a lot of time also on Vancouver Island with the other side of my family, non-Ukrainian family. So there was a period of time when I came back to Alberta, and I was like, oh yeah, Edmonton. Oh, all things like Ukrainian. I forgot about this. You know what I mean? So when I moved back to Edmonton, I was doing this 3-year community herbal apprenticeship program that was intensive. I was doing some part-time work. I was working at a health food store, an apothecary, and I worked there and I taught workshops. I taught anywhere from like 1 to 4 workshops a month, maybe 5, depending on the season and the demand. As well as like I taught a kitchen medicine series that I developed. I facilitated, herb walks, workshops, events, field trips, all kinds of stuff I just felt like it wasn't on offer in the city. And for people who, again, like just really wanted this plant knowledge, but maybe didn't have an entry point to that, or maybe, a lot of people are learning online now, but they don't have an opportunity to like, meet the plants in the flesh. And that's really the important part of learning about plants and herbs. We need to actually be working hands-on with plants. We need to look at them. We need to know how they look in all seasons, who they like to grow with. There's all kinds of stuff that we can't learn academically from books on, we just can't. So anyway, it just so happened, whether this was accidental or whether it was preordained, but the studio space that happened to become available to me was run by a local Ukrainian artist. And I'm not going to shout out her name here because I didn't actually ask her if I'm allowed to spread her name all over the internet, but it just so happened, right? And so kind of peripherally there, I was bumping up against the Ukrainian community, and the studio happened to be located at that time in a little strip mall that was right adjacent to the ACWA, the Alberta, I can never remember what it stands for, sorry, ACWA, the Edmonton Cultural Ukrainian Arts, whatever. Amazing organization, amazing programming. So I was just like, oh, I come sort of from this rural Vancouver Island bubble where I'd been sort of isolated from all this, Ukrainian community for a while, and then I was kind of like, oh, here I am. So there was just like a little Ukrainian pocket there, and I just loved being part of it. I loved stopping downstairs and going to like check out the exhibits. They had a great programming. Okay, so just some pictures of me teaching up in the studio because it was, there we are. And there's some, you know, workshops and field trips and whatnot that we did and hosted and facilitated. So at this time, like I had started a kind of a herb club to sort of do all this stuff, basically, because like I said, there was a gap. And there was a program where I initiated where we paired like medicinal herb gardens in like 2 quadrants of the city, south side and the north side, and we installed like herbs in those gardens for the community to steward, and then I organized programming based around these plants. Because again, I feel really people need to learn plants directly. People need to learn how they grow. We need to have access to them in urban spaces. You know, where else are we going to do that, right? I mean, we can have conversations about that, but that's where that was. So the point of me telling you all of this really is that I was interacting with a lot of people, and so when you're in those spaces talking about plants and people are there to learn about plants, people also share stories with you. So I was talking to Lindsay earlier before we came online, and I said, you know, when I'm in the museum or we're in the museum, you know, people come by all the time, and then it prompts that people to share stories with you about whatever is sort of in the museum at the time, culturally related. They see an old tool, an implement, they see some embroidery, they see something that jogs a memory of something in their family, and they share it with you. We don't really have those spaces for these kinds of like plant and herbal stories, which is why I'm excited about being here tonight and talking about this tonight. And so people would start to sort of share things with me about, you know, oh, I'm Scottish and we use this for this. And oh, I'm la la la. You know, in one of the community gardens, the woman who was stewarding the garden was like, oh, this comfrey in here, it's the bane of my existence. But the woman who planted it here was Afrikaans, and she used to eat the greens. She used to chop and saute the greens. And I was like, oh, interesting, never knew that. And so you start to learn these things. And I was like, oh, but you know, I also want to learn more about my culture. And I was getting more questions from people about their culture. And in all of these interactions, like what I really started to observe was this kind of like cultural hunger. And I guess, for lack of a better word, like spiritual hunger, even though that sounds kind of like, but it's a thing, right? Where people are looking to connect with something meaningful, something, I don't know, something bigger, something tangible, something, okay? It's not very articulate, but that's what it is. And so, you know, around that time and still now, right, you know, a lot more kind of awareness and kind of appreciation was coming up for, you know, cultural appropriation versus appreciation. And so then people really were starting to go like, oh, but like, what are the traditions of my culture? Or how, you know, what are they? Like, what were the rituals? Why don't I know that? Like, what are the plants in my cultural background? What are the spiritually significant plants? Like, what are these things, right? So seeing this happen a lot in my classes and my circles, just in general, that, you know, people are kind of waking up. I think we still have a lot more to do, but waking up to the fact that, you know, are we all just Westerners and capitalism is our culture? Like, what is it, right? There's a lot more to say about that, but there's sort of more than just acquiring and shopping and phones. Like, we kind of are looking for a deeper sort of connection, for lack of a better word. Okay, so I'm calling this remembering the forgetting. Like, why don't we know? So why don't we know this? That's a more interesting question to me, actually, right? Than, like, obviously it's interesting to learn it, but like, why don't we know? So I guess I had my own sort of awakening about that. So again, you know, I grew up within the Ukrainian community, right? Like, I spent all this time on the farm, outdoors, in the bush. We were doing all kinds of, you know, farm things. I was processing plants with my baba. We were doing all this kind of stuff. It's not like I never was around plants. And, you know, in school, the programming was, you know, very like language focused, culture focused, songs, some dance, like, you know, seasonal rituals, Easter, all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, why is it that I've been in this community all my life and I've never actually learned anything or heard anything about herbs are folk medicine. Like, why is that? That seems weird. Okay. So I was just like, like, why is that? You know? So again, just to explore that, I kind of want to widen our lens, and we're going to go on a journey, and I'm going to blast through 100 years. So buckle up, but I'm just trying to give some context for what it is that I'm trying to sort of get at here. Okay. So, why did the Ukrainians come to Canada, right? There was a lot of reasons. Canada had their reasons, the Ukrainians had their reasons, right? Canada, Clifford Sipton, who was in charge at the time, decided that the Ukrainians were the right kind of immigrant for what his goals were for Canada: the agricultural future of Canada, settling the land. He was the Minister of the Interior on one hand, he was the Superintendent of Indigenous Affairs on the other hand. So clearing the land, approving residential schools, all this crazy stuff, all these restrictive, terrible, awful policies related to Indigenous people. But he was like, you know what? The Ukrainians are the people that are going to do this dirty work. they're going to settle this so-called empty land, right? Ukrainians had their own reasons for leaving, a bad situation, right? Lack of land, restrictive policies, shrinking land holdings, poverty, debt. So there was a meeting of like needs there, I guess, right? Where they came from, this is not even the most up-to-date map, but I found this one really fascinating. Someone in a genealogy group that I'm in created it, where it went through these different regions and then showed how the borders changed over time, which is really interesting to me. Not the point of the talk, but really just sort of goes to show that also maybe I'm not saying it overtly, but maybe I should say it overtly. It wasn't just Ukrainians here that came from Western Ukraine. I don't know if you can see my mouse. It was a very multicultural place with lots of different influences going on at the time, a lot of different political influences, a lot of different cultural influences. And then, okay, we have our map of Ukrainian borders today. So they came to Canada. This is the land of, it's called the tribal distributions near Canada at the time. So we can see there was people in all of these spaces. This wasn't empty land, just want to acknowledge that. And here they came. So they came with, really not much, nothing in some cases. I'm not sure at what point the Halifax restricted the bringing in of seeds and plants, but there was a point where people were bringing in seeds and plants. If you go to the museum today now, they'll say oh, this is the place where, when people were bringing that stuff, we started confiscating it. I don't know when that happened, but there definitely was. They did not know what was awaiting them in this new place. And so, of course, aside from the clothes that they could bring or a few small tools or implements or whatever, they were bringing some seeds and plants at some point earlier, very early in the first wave of immigration. And here's where they largely came. So we have Ukrainian Western Bloc settlements in what's now Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Here we go. So we have our first wave, like I said, late 1800s to the start of the First World War. Then we have the interwar period. So people came for their own reasons after the Second World War, between First World War, Second World War. Then we have third wave, post World War II. And then the fourth wave still happening present day for its own reasons. And I've got double photos of the Ruptash family in there. Yay. So this is an early immigration story, right? This is early 1900, and they have a house. They have a house here already. So that was fairly early settlement. Okay, so they came to this place, right, where there's no structures. They have to clear land. They have to, clear trees, dig wells, pick rocks. They have to plant crops. They have to acquire animals. Many people were unprepared for the winters here. They built earth shelters. Clearing the land was a priority. Survival, planting food, gathering food, knowing what the food was. That's a big deal, right? How are you going to eat? How will you be warm? The weather is very harsh. The climate here is a lot colder than Ukraine. Today, we have crazy kind of global warming where we can't really ever predict what the weather is going to be like. So, we had a really mild winter. But that's not the norm, right? So here we have some Ukrainians clearing the land. This is in Manitoba. And this is some of the first houses that they built, the first dwellings, right? So the earth houses, the burdais. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but these are very rudimentary. They're functional in that they are mostly warm and dry, although there's certainly accounts of some early people where they're like, it was not airtight, it leaked, it was cold, it was drafty. You can imagine like spending a winter in here with no indoor plumbing or lights or what have you, right? With all your kids and probably your animals. Here's a painting that Ukrainian artist William Kurlik did, where I was just like, oh yeah, I can see like a little structure there. It looks like a little bird eye in the corner. And then back in the day, Jen's like, not anymore, but like this used to be in the front of the Ukrainian Museum in Saskatchewan. Again, another one of William Kurlik's works. Yeah, showing the Burdai and an early settlement house. So just that was kind of fun. Here is the inside of one of them. This is in the photo from the Ukrainian Heritage Village. It's hard to take photos in there because it's so dark. Any photos that I have in there are not great. But essentially there's like a bed on one side. And then on this side, there's like this little table and they have this mill, this little journal for milling grain. And this is like a very nice, clean, well-kept one. There's another one. I think there's one or two maybe in Manitoba. There's another one in Bukovyna in Alberta, also near Harry Hill, and there's a few examples of these. But tight living quarters until you could eventually build a house. And so, there we go. Here we have a couple plastering their log house. Okay, so it wasn't easy. This is not easy. This is not back to the land, la 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 fun stuff, right? Like, they're having babies. Often the men had to go away and work somewhere else, right? Railroads, logging, other farmers, whatever. So women often birthed by themselves. Sometimes they built houses that, the men came back and they were like, oh, there's a baby that wasn't there when they left, or a structure that there wasn't when they left. They had multiple children. Like they worked all the time. So women really, they worked very hard and they had to be the family doctor often. And we'll kind of get more into that in a little bit. Just going to do a time check here. Okay, so the thing is that Clifford Sifton thought it was a great idea. The Ukrainians, they were a great idea, but they were not really welcomed by like the established kind of Anglo community at all. And so I always thought that was kind of like a general anti-immigration sentiment. But yes, to a degree, but I read recently that actually, like at the time, the Ukrainians were sort of the brunt of it. They took the biggest brunt of it. For some reason, they were targeted. They were like, they really got under the skin of everyone else, right? So we have some really, I could fill 2 or 3 slides with like derogatory, derisive comments about the immigrants, which we don't need to do. The point is being like, they were not really welcomed. They were not, they weren't like, hey neighbors. There was a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism against the Ukrainian settlers here, which is very well known, like within the community, certainly a certain age, and not, this is an article, this one from 1899 from the Winnipeg Telegram. The Winnipeg Telegram did not have good things to say about the Ukrainians back in the day, the Galicians, but this continued like right through to like the 70s even. So, like he's basically saying in this article, these unfortunate white settlers find themselves hemmed in, surrounded by a horde of people little better than savages, alien in race, language, and religion, whose customs are repellent and whose morals he abhors. All hopes of further British settlement in the neighborhood vanishes. He becomes an alien in his own country. There's nothing left for him but a galling, lifelong exile on British soil equivalent to deportation to a Siberian settlement. Oh. And then up here, we've got some comments like the scum of Europe, moral lepers, the sweepings of European Gauls. And honestly, I was reading some more stuff today and I'm like, we don't need any more. We get the idea. It's bad stuff. So they were not happy about their new neighbors. Okay. So in the meantime, we have the Ukrainians, they're here. they're excited for their land, but they're doing all this hard work, right? So here we just have some photos of the, you know, the land clearing, gardening. This is from the first wave until, you know, we could establish like the kitchen gardens. And like I said, you know, some of these are from, yeah, these are all from the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, which are really beautiful, and definitely recommend people can, you know, to visit there if you can go there. But the gardens, the kitchen gardens were massive, like in addition to like grain crops and whatnot that you'd be growing, or hemp. We'll talk about that too. Yeah, like here's cabbages in a field, like that's enormous. It's an astounding amount of work and processing. And I just popped in some other photos because I love photos, but here we have hay, and a mix of like Alberta, Manitoba, and then on the top we have a woman baking up there in her outdoor oven. And then eventually the houses, like, you know, looked like this. And so of course I popped this in here because we've got a lot of herbs drying and we're going to be talking about that. And that's exciting. I also slipped this one in there because the similarities to this like traditional house and the herbs in the Kiev Pharmacy Museum in Podil is very, very similar. So it's like that museum dates back from like the 1700s or something, the building that it's in, but it's just like, it's just very interesting, the similarity, right? So from old country to new country. So I guess I just wanted to pause and just wonder, like, who knew that? Who all knew that? Like who, I know, like I said, some of you very familiar with that. That might be really new information to some people. So just curious. Okay. So, okay, we're going to get into like why we might use herbs. So what are some of the health challenges of that time? So it's really interesting, like they weren't great. So when people were leaving Ukraine in Halychyna, there's a guy, his name is Michael, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, if it's Andretz. He did this presentation, this research called Disease and Death in 19th Century Galicia, and chronicled like the main causes of death in the 1800s in Halychyna. So like you can see, I don't need to read it all out, but it's like whooping cough, pneumonia, cholera, asthma, scarlet fever, dysentery, typhus, childbirth, measles, chickenpox, like stuff that we would not really mostly be concerned about today. There was cholera epidemics. And here in Canada, like we had diphtheria epidemics. There was a scarlet fever epidemic for some newcomers here in Canada coming from Ukraine in 1899. Actually, I think it was 42 children died and 3 adults. Spanish flu. Like there was stuff that went around that like really is not ideal. And you know, I also want to make a point to say that like when we're talking about herbs and folk healing, like that's not to replace like the measures that are going to be preventing these like public health situations at all. So again, before we start talking about our plants, I just want to like do a quick little group exercise. So, because I think it's helpful, right? So let's imagine, right? So this is the context for which we're talking about this folk medicine that I'm looking through with this lens, right? So again, like this is my lens, this is my context, this isn't the only lens. If you grew up in Ukraine or under the Soviet Union, you're going to have a different lens, okay? They're all valid. So just think about like what's in your medicine cabinet right now, right? Think about the last time you had a headache. Think about the last time you went to the doctor and like what it was for, like whether it was an earache, your kid's ear infection, asthma, croup, whether you have heartburn, you have rash, you have a hernia, arthritis pain, you know, you have a baby with croup. I think I've already said that. You have a lump, like all these things, right? And then we're seeing all this stuff here, and we're like hearing about all these, you know, pretty bad epidemic of things. We have a lack of doctors, which we'll talk about. We have cold, we have exposure, you know, you're working outside, maybe you're getting frostbite, maybe you're, you know, getting sunburn. There's a lack of hygiene because like, where's the water coming from? Think about the winter in those houses, those earth houses. Do you have clean drinking water? You're sharing space with animals. So maybe like there's parasites or fleas, we're having babies, we have colds and flu. All this hard work where we could get prone to injuries, maybe like a horse steps on your foot, you fall and dislocate your shoulder, you make a mistake and you put the shovel through your foot, whatever, like all kinds of crazy stuff happened, right? When you're tired. So like, what are you doing? And doctors were very sparse in the settlements at the time. So they really had to rely on their folk medicine knowledge for a lot of common things. And even some more serious things where we would probably go and seek medical attention. So they really relied on local and cultivated plants for a lot of these kind of like treatments and remedies. They needed strength, they needed fortitude, but you know, they needed other things as well. So yeah, it just like puts it into perspective, you know? Okay. So yeah, it's like, it was folk medicine. That's all they really had at their disposal. And what they brought with them. And they brought with them a lot. These people lived in the land for a long time. So here's a quote. This is from like Andrea Klemesh. She wrote a book that I'm going to mess the name up. It's something like Ukrainian folk medicine, something Canada. Don't quote me on that. I can give it to you later properly. But just like someone's talking about the fact, like how the people in the settlements don't, you know, use the doctors, right? And I'm just going to move my, my little tab down to the bottom. So when did the prohibitive prices the doctors must charge for their services are added to the handicaps inherent in the situation, owing to the conservative and ignorant attitudes of the people he's talking about are the Ukrainians, it will be seen that the great majority of the Ukrainians in the rural settlements are left untouched by the health institutions. So not really, no doctors. There was this guy, this doctor, he came, I think this was to Manitoba in 1897, and he practiced for several years there. So he told this story where he was visiting a sick woman in a house. He says it was a typical immigrant's home on the prairie, a one-room shack with dirt floors and a sod roof, which we just saw. The bed where the patient lay stood high on pine blocks, and under it were a number of boxes filled with children. Hens, geese, pigs, and calves were also in the room. The stench was awful. So he's saying a typical immigrant's home on the prairie, you know, like this isn't necessarily atypical. And, you know, he wasn't especially showing a lot of compassion for it either, right? So there they were. This is the conditions in which they had to live to survive, but, you know, they were also judged for it. Okay, so what were they like? How did they help themselves, right, in this situation or in these contexts? So we have like physical and, you know, what I call non-physical interventions. So physical interventions would be like cupping, and cupping was still used, I don't know even until when. There's actually, I forgot to pop it in here, but there's a set of glass cups here in the Manitoba Museum. I saw them in the Kiev Pharmacy Museum again in Podil. So that was a common thing. There's like wet cupping and dry cupping where you'd like, I wish I'd put the photo in, but basically like it creates a vacuum. And I think a lot of people are sort of familiar with the idea of cupping nowadays. It's kind of like come back, or we think of it as like something part of like Chinese medicine. And they were either like wet or dry cupped, where sometimes there was like, for wet, there was like an incision made and like a little bit of blood released, or a leech. And then they would put the cup on to help back pain, strain, whatever, lots of different reasons. I think this is still practiced a little bit more, maybe not the wet, but in Ukraine today, more so than we do like for ourselves. They handled ears. There was massage and manipulation, steaming and sweating. So, you know, especially for fevers, colds, and flus. There was bone setters in the community, which I find really interesting. And I was actually just reading a book this week. And the book, again, I don't recall the exact name of it, but it was basically a biography by this Canadian woman. Her name is Diana Beresford Kruger. And she's talking about her sort of like growing up and being sort of initiated or apprenticed into like traditional Celtic ways, like within her community, in a lot of like cultural practices that are dying off or have since died off. And her uncle was actually like a bone setter, and he was it was just like the gift that he was given. So no one necessarily taught him that. Maybe he was apprenticed in some way, but so there was people like that in the Ukrainian community too. Michael Mutz, when he did his research and did all kinds of oral interviews with elders in the Ukrainian community and the block in which I sort of grew up, he referenced that also when he said, it's possible that some of the people may have learned that like during their military service in the Austro-Hungarian Empire also, but there's no doubt that sometimes people are just gifted at certain things. So, and there's an interesting relationship between the Celts and the Ukrainians too, which is kind of cool, genetic link. We had community midwives because, back in those early days, people were not going to the doctors, or doctors weren't present for births, and herbs and herbal treatments, remedies, and preventatives. So those are some of the physical things. Non-physical stuff. It's sometimes like hard for us to kind of like, I don't know, have a context for now, but there was a very strong belief in curses or the evil eye. There was a lot of rituals and practices to guard against said curses or the evil eye, as well as to remove, reverse, and banish them. And then there was also a ritual, which we'll talk about, to clear or remove kind of either fear or some kind of like a psycho-spiritual disturbance that might be causing some kind of physical health concern or some kind of, it'd be manifesting in some way that was causing problems for people. So the cultivated herbs, food, medicines, and wild harvested plants that they would use were wild and berried. So they had kitchen garden plants and veggies that they were planting right in their kitchen gardens, things like cabbage leaves, fermented sometimes or not, potatoes, garlic, onions. They were used in many ways. They cultivated a lot of herbs. So many herbs grown in Ukraine were brought and cultivated for use around the property and in the kitchen gardens, and we'll touch on those a little bit later. And then there was a lot of local plants that they would have been familiar with, because there was a very big similarity in terms of the landscape and the type of plants we have here. Now, there is a lot of plants that they have in Ukraine that we don't have here, right? Like Bukovyna, right, is the beech forest. We don't have those kinds of trees, but there's a lot of the similar plants like growing in the understory that would have been familiar. So, mint is very familiar anywhere you live. You learn to recognize it. It grows near water. Nettles also. Coltsfoot also, like, wet feet. There's things like tansy, violets, the berries, raspberries, blueberries, high bush and low bush cranberry, local Artemisia species like wormwood, St. John's wort, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of things at their disposal. There was lots of other different healing agents also, which is really interesting, like things that we wouldn't necessarily think of maybe now in a kind of like contemporary Western context. So like, yeah, we think about like, oh, honey for salves or, beeswax or whatever. But, if someone was going to make something topical or salve to put on the skin, they're probably going to use what they have at their disposal. And if there was no bees or kept bees, or you couldn't trade for this kind of thing early, like you'd be using the fats available to you, like goose fat, right? Lard, those kinds of things. So they were using fats. They were using grease, like mechanical grease, axle grease. Like they had to be very resourceful. Milk, manure, hair and feathers. So depending on what you needed it for. There was items of a spiritual nature, often from the church. So holy water, candles, candle drippings, and then the water was quite prominent as well, and we'll talk about that. But also human materials like urine and human hair. So some stuff that we're kind of like today, we might be like, I don't know if we want to bring that back, right? And it's okay. We don't need to bring it all back. So in the last sort of part of my presentation, I want to just talk about some plants that I think are important to the diaspora in some way, right? So in terms of like commonly used, significant to the diasporan experience or the identity. This is not an exhaustive list at all. And this isn't like a this herb for that condition kind of thing, although maybe we will touch on that a little bit, because it's just outside of the scope of our talk. Like I can't give you a herbal materia medica and that kind of thing. But we are going to talk about a few plants. So let's do it. The first plant, which is no surprise, it's garlic, because if there's one plant that I think of as like the Ukrainian plant, and I know we do not have like a monopoly on it, but I think of garlic. So, you know, garlic is one of those food and medicine plants. And you know, it's one of the things, it's one of the parts of the reasons why Ukrainians were discriminated against, right? Like they smelled like garlic, like it was their clothing, it was their language, their accents. And you know, so like the garlic belt, I never knew this was a thing. I just learned this, but I don't know if this is like some cutesy little name that the Ukrainians gave it themselves, or if this is like sort of a derogatory term that other people like assigned it. But the Ukrainian settlements, apparently one of the little nicknames that it has is the garlic belt. I don't know. I'm not mad about it. I like it, but we could reclaim it if it was supposed to be derogatory. But there it is. So, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the wax pouring. Sometimes it was used as part of that ritual. Oral accounts will say that they self-declared, or they, you know, there's no way to like measure this, I think, scientifically or quantitatively, that they felt that the reason that they fared a little bit better in the Ukrainian community, in the Ukrainian bloc settlements during the Spanish flu epidemic, was because of their use of garlic and homebrew. So yeah, it's very useful plant for coughs, colds, respiratory infections, has lots of volatile oils, which tend to be antimicrobial generally, sulfuric compounds, minerals, and it's very easy to grow. It's very low maintenance, and you can make a syrup out of it. It's so good. Okay, so the second one is Kalena. So that's not a surprise to anyone. So high bush, low bush cranberry. It's a very symbolic plant in many ways, for and more ways than I can probably appreciate. Also, like being from the diaspora, I think this has like a lot even more significance to those of you who grew up in Ukraine. But you know, the berries are a metaphor for nationhood independence, right? So they planting one outside the home can bring health and good fortune, or was believed to. Some speculate that it was maybe planted at sites where pre-Christian pagan rituals were performed. There's lots of really good Kalena sort of medicine that we can make. This is one of the exceptions that I'll make for like telling you some medicinal stuff. And the reason is that in Andrea Klimesh's work, this guy, Frank Kuzik, collected some medicine knowledge from people in the community. And again, this is in Manitoba I'm speaking about. So this is like coming straight from the community. This isn't coming from like a Western account or a Western herbal book. This is like the dosing and the prescription that he was saying that was like used by people in the community. So the bark they would use for internal bleeding and nosebleeds and stomach cramps, flowers for fever and cough. He gives the dosing, and berries for, he said, sharp pains or colitis in the intestines, and he's giving you how to take it and how often to take it there. I'm not like substantiating that necessarily, but like just saying. Not saying he's wrong, but okay. So the next one is hemp, you know, kanopli. Look at this beautiful hemp. My grandparents grew hemp. So my Baba's parents, the Mandricks, grew hemp in the district until the 30s when it was outlawed. I think they stopped, but I don't know. There were some people that definitely kept going. They were like, no, we're just going to kind of be like quieter about it. My Baba said that she remembers it growing very tall. So this hemp was growing very tall. And then she said, when it came time to cut and harvest it, the men had to take breaks. And I was like, why did the men have to take breaks? And I think that's because like the THC content in this hemp that they were growing is not necessarily like the benign low THC content in the hemp, the industrial hemp that we're growing now. Like, I think it was a little bit like it was having some psychoactive effects, and they had to like pace themselves, or like, you know, do small bursts. That was the way I interpreted her or telling me that. So yeah, it was grown on many farms and homesteads, like until, like I said, 1937. It was an important plant for textiles, for clothing and household items. So I like working in the museum. I get to, look at a lot of handmade clothing and sorochka, and the hemp is very extraordinary. The all of the embroidery that's done on hemp, it's so thick, it's so durable. It has such a very earthy, organic texture. The embroidery threads pop out on it. It looks very beautiful. And it's so durable. Like I can't express that. Like it looks like a new garment now. It could be like 100 years old. We have a really exceptional example in the Ukrainian Museum of Canada here in Manitoba. And there's one that's like late 1800s, and it's like a full length sorochka with some cut work on the arms. And it's like in pristine condition. Like it looks like it's probably never been worn. Like maybe it has been worn once or twice. I don't know. So, many homes had looms for weaving and processing fiber and hemp. It was an important food seed for oil, so that was a thing. When it came time to like harvest the seeds, all of the communities had an oil press. So like in the block settlements, there was either a traveling person that came to process your hemp seeds into oil, or you took it to them. So my uncle said he remembers, he's like, I can't remember the guy's name, have to look it up. He's like, there was so-and-so and he lived down by the river. That's where we took it to press the seeds into oil. So the thing that's kind of sad about that is that, this is kind of legal again, and we've lost generations of cultural knowledge, right? In terms of growing it, harvesting it, processing it. There was like a very involved process of like cutting it, stooking it, retting it, to like, get the fiber from the stalk and turn it into fabric. And there's such a demand for it now in terms of like, for medicine. A lot of it is for medicine, but inflammation and other concerns topically and externally. But we've lost a lot of cultural knowledge. We could have been growing this for the last hundreds of years, and not trees. So okay, one of my other beloved plants is poppies. I love them. This is like a big symbol for me of Ukrainian culture. Like I know today, contemporarily, now it's like the sunflower, but for me, it's always been the poppy. I don't know why. This was outlawed again in the 30s, also like hemp, because of the concerns about like its opium content. So there are many stories of the RCMP coming to the homesteads in the block asking women to remove their flowers. And on the one hand, I find that amusing, and on the other hand, I find that like not patronizing, but yes, patronizing, and also infuriating, because it's not like, right, we're looking at the conditions in which these people are living and have come from, right? We're seeing like the houses that are there. We're not looking at acres and acres and acres of poppy fields. Like this isn't an Ozark situation where there's like acres of fields where they're in this like underground heroin trade. Do you know what I mean? I know they're doing their job. Probably they went and they got fed something cool, and maybe that like, I don't know, prompted them to visit more often. But largely this was grown on a small household scale for seeds, and it was used for medicine, a desperate kind of medicine, and we'll talk about that next. But poppy seeds, so good, right? So that again, they were also grown for oil. This is another important seed plant for oil. Baking, I really like. I don't know about you, but pierogi, like all of the poppy seed cakes, like all of the ways that poppies kind of like evolved in baking and the diaspora is like so good. Of course, important ingredient, for our kutia, our first ritual dish for Christmas. And so much poppy symbolism in just Ukrainian folk culture in general, right? In Ukrainian dance, it's a very central part of our binke for certain regions, certain styles. And then the desperate medicine was that it was also used when moms were just tired and overworked, or the babies were sick and they needed the kids to be out of harm's way. They had a lot to do. Or I remember my baba telling me this, where she said that like they would use poppy milk to help the kids sleep. And maybe that was like a legitimate reason for the kids to sleep. They were sick and fussy, or maybe they needed to do some stuff, and they didn't have a babysitter. Not ideal. So again, Michael Moots has a couple of oral stories of why that wasn't a good idea. So this is, I'm sharing you poppy medicine. We love poppy. We can love it. But again, that doesn't mean that we need to bring it back and start using it in this way. Like some things are better left behind, but it's just good to be aware it's part of our cultural plant use. So, so this woman, she made the mistake of bathing her young daughter in a solution or a bath with green poppy pods in the water. So too strong, not good. And then explaining that, the poppies could kill, and this steer, like a big giant, animal, ate some of them and it died. So here we have another one. So this is interesting because sometimes they were given, I don't want to go too much into how it's done because actually, this is going to live on the internet forever. We don't need to get into that. But one of the ways was that they would put like poppy seed or unripe poppy seed into like fabric and give it to the children to like gnaw on, like a teething agent, like a little doll, like a little, so it helped them calm and sedate them, but very dose was important and you couldn't control it in this situation. So in this account, saying the poppy juice did make me sleep well, but it dulled my mind. When I went to school, my brothers and sisters were doing well, but I was not. Another woman told my mother that it was the poppies that made me a slow learner. My mom cried when she realized what she'd done to me. Ugh, I can't even read the rest of it. Okay. So sad. All right. Okay. So here's a lady that told me this story about her baba. Like this is like going into the mid-60s. Baba continued to grow poppies after Prohibition into the mid-60s and grow them for the poppy seed. She always planted them on the far side of the garden so it couldn't be seen from the road because the police used to come and confiscate them because of opium, right? And then she said, come to think of it, like that's where she planted the hemp too. Which I love. And I know that Jen has a story about a family member going on a little journey with poppies, and maybe she'll tell us that also when we wrap up. Unless you want to pop in and just share it with us now, Jen, while we're on topic.
Well, I was just chatting, saying that my grandparents actually grew opium poppies until the mid-1980s. So I have photographs of myself standing in them over my head or up to my ears. And my Auntie Christina, who lived a very good life to the age of 104, left her abusive husband in the 1950s and came to live with her sister's family, my Baba's family. And she told me the story of one day, without much to do, because my grandmother was the one that worked hard, so she didn't have to, she decided to try the poppy milk. So she broke open a poppy plant and just licked some of the white milk from the plant. And then she said, and the next thing I knew, I woke up on my back in the garden 3 hours later. So so that was in the 50s, but in the 80s, our farm, we were still growing them, and I believe the RCMP knew about it, and they just kind of overlooked it on purpose, but they were aware. Mm-hmm.
Right. They're like, okay, you're not running a secret Ozark underground heroin operation. Yeah, you're fine. Exactly. Right. Okay. Good job, guys. Thank you. Thanks, Jen. I love that. So good. Okay. So this one is interesting because it's a native plant. It's not, this wasn't brought over, but I think of this as I think of it as a diasporan plant, but it's not exclusively a diasporan plant. We'll talk about that. So this Seneca snake root is an indigenous plant. Somehow it was introduced into European medicine in the 1700s. They learned about it. They discovered it, I'm sure, from indigenous people. And it became really desirable for respiratory remedies. So it was exported and used in many medicines like cough syrups, lozenges, this kinds of thing, like in a big way over to Europe. And it still continues to be today, actually. I don't know, I don't have a lot of accounts in terms of whether it was actually used much by the Ukrainian community, but it was a very kind of significant part of supplemental income for many women and families in the Ukrainian community in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. So my partner's Baba, my partner's grandma, remembers her mom going to dig Seneca root. She would go with a neighbor. This is something that they would do. Generally, roots are generally harvested in the fall and the spring, but I think because maybe these guys were so low growing and maybe harder to identify, they typically harvested them around July because that's when it was blooming and you could identify them in the field. And so you would go and dig Seneca root, right? You'd clean and process your roots, you leave it out outside to dry in the sun, or preferably not in the sun, but they needed to be dry. And then there was all the local stores where you could take them and you could sell your Seneca root to them. So Jeff's, oh, I shouldn't out him on the internet. My partner's family is from southern Manitoba. And so she said that from her recollection, there was a company called Robinson's that used to buy it, like from the local store. They would resell it on to Europe. And this was like a big thing. So again, like I'm talking about cultural context and the lens in which you see things. Obviously, the Ukrainians were not the only one doing this. They learned it, right? It was a big part of supplemental income for indigenous families, for Métis families, and we have accounts of like Doukhobor families, like basically anyone that had access to the land and had the economic reason to need to have supplemental income, I'm sure was digging and harvesting Seneca root. And then we have mushrooms. So we're not like a mushroom, this isn't like an ID walk and talk, but like honestly, mushrooms are so attached to like the Ukrainian identity and experience. There was familiar mushrooms here, and we have a few of them. So top right, we have kozari, the red top bullets, we have pitpenke, the honey mushrooms, and we have smorji, morel mushrooms, which like, I don't know why, but in my mind, I have a funny story about that. We'll get there. This is the funny story. So I was reading a news article one day, and it was like couple or like woman discovers like giant king bullet mushroom. And this was somewhere in Vancouver. And I don't remember where we were living at the time that I read this, but I didn't read the article. I didn't see the video or anything. And I said to my partner, 100% that person is Slavic, East European. I would guarantee it. I don't know why I had such confidence in it, but I went and looked at it. And yes, of course, here we go. Her name, Olya Kutsyuruba. And I was like, what? Maybe she's not Ukrainian. I don't know. And then, the article specifically says from Ukraine, grew up in Ukraine. And I was like, I knew it. Of course she was. So because mushrooms were often like a family activity, and it was just part of that supplemental, like, food gathering. Like, why wouldn't you gather and eat the mushrooms around you, especially when they're delicious? And, they have a lot of really health benefit properties as well. So a couple of other mushrooms that people would use. So the puffball is technically edible when it's like younger. And I don't know whether or not they actually ate them. I'm not sure. But the spore powder. So, when you're like finding a puffball mushroom and you find it in the grass and you step on it and it poofs out all that black cloud, like all the spore dust later in the season. So that was often used and saved for disinfecting and healing wounds. So that was like an important medicine. And the amanita is not one that we should eat, although I think there is like a Ukrainian folk culture tradition around using it in some way internally, which we're not going to do. Because it has some toxic compounds, but this was one that, it was chopped up and put into milk or a liquid and kept in the house to kill flies. So the flies would land on the milk, drink the milk, and they would die, which is why, again, we're not using it internally. So amanitas are like those magical mushrooms. Usually we see them like red with the white spots, but in Alberta, and I can't speak to the whole country because I don't know, but like Alberta has the yellow ones, the specific variety where they're yellow with white spots. And I know I've seen the yellow ones here too in Manitoba. I don't know if we have the red ones here. I know they have those on the West Coast. The prairies might just have this particular variety just because of our landscape. And I think this is our last one, sunflower. So of course, we, ever since the full-scale invasion war in Ukraine, like everything is sunflower, sunflower, sunflower. And sunflowers are interesting because they're called phytoremediators. So in that we plant them in the soil and they can help draw up toxic substances. So they help clean up the soil. So they planted them around the Chernobyl disaster site in the 80s to help remove all of the cesium and strontium, all of the radioactive compounds from the soil. And then interestingly, they tried that in Fukushima and it didn't work. And they were like, well, we should have looked at the genetic material of the sunflowers. They're not the same. They're not the same here. Sunflowers are also interesting in that they move with the sun. So when they're still young, they move with the sun. And then when they get older and established, they just face dead east. Why, I don't know. But I find it interesting because, you know, this is a plant that's indigenous to North America. It's like indigenous to Turtle Island. Like it dates back to like, I don't know, 3000 BC or something. And then it came over to Europe and then spread into, you know, Eastern Europe. I want to say, I'm not good with dates, like let me see. I can't recall. A long time ago. A long time ago. And you know, it was famously planted like in the 90s post Budapest memorandum to, you know, on the site of like a nuclear launch pad, like symbolizing like, you know, symbolizing some stuff that didn't come to pass. And there was many others. So, you know, like I said, they did bring plants over with them, and we do have categorized that to a degree. I'm sure not all of them, like it's not exhaustive, but you know, we had things like marigold, chamomile, yarrow, plantain, the herbs, right? Basil, thyme, marjoram, steppe mint, catmint, caraway, dill, lovage, basil, thyme, and feverfew. Of course, we have also our culturally significant plants like periwinkle, butterbeanock, myrtle, sunflower again, so it came back. Like it was so important that it went there and then it came back. Mallow, lily of the valley, monkshood, which I find interesting because that one is also very toxic. So I'm not sure if it was only used externally. I was taught to use it externally, like through a Western herbal lens. I'm not sure how it was used, so I don't recommend that anyone be playing with that one. Sweet flag, marigold, which interestingly enough is also another, you know, native North American Turtle Island plant. Things like horseradish and sorrel. And I'm sorry, I can't see my bottom row, so I'm always missing the bottom row reading it out loud, but I trust that you can read that one. So then we're just almost done here. We have non-physical interventions. So things like we talked about, removing curses or effects of the evil eye, practices to guard against these things as well as to reverse or banish them. And then kind of like the thing that really persisted the most or the longest within the diaspora and Ukrainian Canadian community was the wax pouring or the wax healing ritual to clear or remove fear. So fear is a loose term. It's more of like we say a psycho-spiritual disturbance of some sort, but that encompasses sort of many things. So this is really interesting. So when I was younger, one of my cousins was taken to one person, maybe more than one person, I don't know, to have wax poured. And this isn't something that like was weird or different. It was just something that like happened to some people sometime, or you needed to do it. And it wasn't until I was like an adult, through the lens of an adult, like well into my adulthood, where I was like, what is that? Like, what is that now? Like what was it? What were they doing? What was it for? Like, how does it work? And so there still was a fair number of people like in our rural community that practice this strakh vylyvaty. So the wax, what Rina Hanchuk, who did extensive research and oral interviews on this, calls the wax healing ritual. So mostly this was performed by women in the community, but there was one man like in our community who also did that. He was also one of the people she interviewed for her book, The Word and Wax, which I highly recommend if you can find it. But it's also available on PDF. I think her thesis on the internet somewhere. So basically, what would happen is that you would have something going on in your life. You can't sleep. You're restless. Your child is wetting the bed. Maybe you feel like you've been the recipient of a bad look or some envy or something, or you don't know what's going on. You're stressed. You're whatever. So these are kind of like don't always fit into like Some of them might be physical reasons, but they might be reasons that maybe you don't go to the doctor, or the doctor maybe doesn't have a good answer for what is happening to you, basically, let's say. So you go to a woman usually, and there's like, I don't know, well over 25 names that this woman could be called: a baba, a babe, like a shiptuka, like there's all these kinds of names this woman could be called by. And so she would pour wax for you. So she would have at her disposal a pot, and it's not like a fancy pot with water. Traditionally, they would draw well water early in the morning before the dawn. She would melt beeswax into this water. There was a ritual knife, and over your head. So there was kind of like a ritual number of 3. She would either pour over your head, over your chest, over your back, or 3 times over your head, pour this wax into the water. And some of the practitioners would actually look at the forms of the wax and divine what it is that's causing you the problem. And some didn't. Some were like, no, we don't know how to do that. That's not the most important thing. But they would pour 3 times, and then the wax gets clearer and clearer. So there was sort of kind of rituals that were intended to be done around this, like certain days of the week, certain times of the day. Although, Rena Hanchuk noted that some of them were just in such demand that they poured it every day, all the time. So, even though it was supposed to be done in the morning necessarily, there was too many people that were in need, and they would do it in the afternoon. They would do it all days of the week, except maybe Sunday. So there's modern adaptations to this traditional ritual. And then they would, say prayers, and sometimes they incorporated Christian elements, and sometimes they didn't. And the act of like pouring the wax and clearing would kind of relieve or remove whatever was bothering you. And then at the end, that water would be poured someplace where no one would walk, so there was no transference into another person. So really interesting stuff, right? Like just very, I don't know, non-linear. And there's a lot more to say about that. But again, this isn't entirely what the workshop is about. So I just wanted to touch on that, because the interesting thing to me about that is that, like in the 90s, you probably couldn't find someone, like, I don't know that there was someone who was known to be like a herbalist in the community, for example, but you could still find people that would pour wax for you. And so today there isn't that many people doing it anymore. So, right, like what are our, what does it look like for our herbal traditions and our folk healing traditions today, basically? I'm gonna just try and move my little, sorry. Oh gosh, I'm just gonna try and move my little thing up to the side so I can see what's going on the bottom, but I won't be able to do it. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons, right, why we don't have this anymore, right? So obviously we have kind of public healthcare system, we have socialized medicine that came in. So along with that, and the desire to phase out like all of these associations of all of this poverty, all these things, that were considered uncivilized, people moved away from herbs and home remedies, right? There was a colonial pressure to assimilate, absolutely. It is my observation, like working in the herbal world, for example, that there's a lot more still active like herbal traditions down in the States, which I think is maybe because they don't really have the same kind of like coverage of medicine, like the healthcare that we have up here. So I think people had to be a little bit more resilient, and in many ways, had to maybe hold on to that knowledge a little bit longer. And like I said, the wax pouring endured for a lot longer than herbal remedies did. So it seemed to meet a certain need that Western medicine didn't address. And it kind of worked within a cultural context, right? There are still a few people who either still do it or are learning to do it, but they're very few and far between. And, I kind of wonder, do we have the cultural context still now where that is relevant, like in a big scale, right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, right? Like are you really cursed if you don't believe in a curse? I don't know. I think there's 2 ways to look at it. And we have also urbanization, which disconnects us from the plants, from the land, to all of these calendar and agricultural based rituals, right, that follow the cycles of the year. That's the thing too, right? We just don't, we're trying now, right, to get back to like urban gardening and learn our plants and herbs, but it's, we're in the grind. We're in a different way of life. We're in a different lifestyle. We have different demands on our time, different kinds of stressors. So we might not be working from dawn to dusk, like in the way that our ancestors were, hands-on the land, but we still are, we have demands on our time, but just in a different way, Okay. So like, where does it leave us? So like, how do we reconnect with what we've left behind, right? Like I said, some of it is great, some of it's useful, some of it's relevant, some of it we don't probably need to come back. We don't need to be, dosing the babies with poppy juice. I was reading just yesterday, actually, in a Ukrainian folk medicine book, like speaking of things that maybe I probably would want to leave behind. But it was talking about the significance of the moon in healing, right? And so I'm like, yeah, cool, great, right? Like where whenever we want things to increase and grow, new moon, we want something to reduce or banish, like, waxing moon, right? Or sorry, waning moon. But they're saying, well, no, but anyway, not important. Talking about using the moon in ritual. But I was surprised to read that like way back in the day, that the moonlight was considered a bad or an evil influence, and people would guard against it, like protect their kids from the moonlight. They would put bowls of water in the windowsills to drown the moon. The moon was considered a bad influence. And I was like, you know what? For me, as like a 21st century Westerner, I'm not going to add moonlight to the list of things that like that are like on my not okay list. Like there's enough things. Like I think the moon is okay, unless someone's like, you know what, have we looked at the moon yet? Like, is that the reason for all of the things? Like, I think we're going to leave that behind. And then there was also like a belief, concurrent with this, that like in your teeth, like cavities were caused by worms and parasites. Well, that's interesting. Like, is that true? Or like, is that something useful that we need to bring back? Like, maybe not, right? So I'm not advocating that we bring back stuff that isn't necessarily relevant, but like 100% in my work as a herbalist, plant medicine is very relevant. So it's very useful, and it's very complementary to the current healthcare system that we have in ways that also fills gaps that I think our healthcare system doesn't address, right? So whether it's like complementary cancer care, whether it's like hormonal support, like digestion, inflammation, autoimmunity, there's lots of ways that herbs really support. So, there's more and more desire now, like we talked about, for people to reconnect with plants and folk medicine practices, and especially within a cultural context. But, we've lost so much language, we've left it behind, we've lost so many elders. We're trying to reconstruct our traditions now because we realize what we've lost. So how do we do that, right? How do we stitch it back together? That's the challenge, right? And then we have another whole interesting layer of interest where like we have all these newcomers coming now, and they have so much plant knowledge. So that's going to be a really cool collaboration, right? So where does it fit in? Like, do we still want to do like wax healing? How do we integrate it in a meaningful way? I still think that it's important that we are mindful, that we guard against sort of colonial influences in our, not just in our culture, but generally speaking, we have so much more to lose culturally. I also want to say that I do think that young people really do want to get involved and learn, and not just herbs and folk medicine practices, but like lots of ways, like within a cultural context. I think it's important to offer entry points into all of our community spaces, our organizations, with regards to programming, relationship and community building, mentorships. And I was just also talking to someone just before the webinar, and I won't call them out, but they said I would identify them as a younger person. And they said to me, you know what, I wish that I could have a Baba as a mentor, like, in terms of gardening and plants and all this stuff. Like, and I was like, absolutely. There's got to be some kind of like funding for a program like that where we can partner people up and have mentors between the, the older generations and the younger, especially like in this cultural context. I think it's really important. So that's what I got. That's all I got. I really blasted through that because I really wanted to touch on a lot of that stuff. And I am opening the floor up to questions.